Hello everyone! RWBY is officially back in action. It's been a long wait, but we finally made it to the premiere of Volume 9. Today I bring you my review of Volume 9, Chapter 1, A Place of Particular Concern. Now this probably goes without saying, but this video will contain spoilers for the first episode of the new volume. If you haven't watched it yet, and don't want it spoiled, then stop here, go watch it, and come back. And hey, on your way out or on the way back in, why don't you give the video a like, and consider subscribing to my channel. With Volume 9 out, there's going to be plenty more videos from me going forward, and if you aren't going anywhere, then you may as well give a like and subscribe while you're here. With that shameless plug out of the way, let's get into the review proper. First and foremost, my overall opinion of the episode. I liked it. Not much happened overall, but this was clearly meant as a setup episode for the rest of the volume. The episode felt a bit short, but I think part of that was due to the fact that we'd already seen pretty much the first 6 minutes of the episode in the form of teasers, from the intro with the ending of Volume 8, seen from RWBY's point of view, to her landing and meeting Little. By the way, Little is hands down my favorite new character. I know that's not saying much, as they're basically the only new character we've met, and maybe that'll change as we're introduced to more characters, but he and the other mice were so stinking cute that I just couldn't help but love them. Overall, this episode was clearly just setting up storylines and getting us settled into the new world of the Ever After, and I'm very excited to see where we go from here. Breaking down the episode scene by scene, it was interesting to see the events of the ending of Volume 8 from a first-person perspective. I think it did a good job of showing just how chaotic everything was, right to the moment that RWBY fell. And then we get RWBY drifting down in the void, passing these little orbs of light. And then Neo ambushes her, because they don't have bigger things to worry about, like falling possibly forever in a void seemingly without end. I gotta say, seeing Neo transform into each of her friends while she was attacking her must have been a very stressful experience for RWBY, and you can hear it in her voice. The way her breathing picks up and the sounds of distress she makes as Neo shifts between Oscar, Yang, and Penny, hats off to Lindsay for that performance. After Neo and RWBY arrive in the Ever After, we get RWBY waking up on the beach and, interestingly, we hear what I am pretty sure is Penny calling RWBY's name repeatedly. Now initially I didn't think this was Penny, I thought it was a new voice, but after going back and rewatching the start of the episode, Penny calls out RWBY's name as RWBY and Neo fall, and it sounds pretty much the exact same as the voice calling RWBY's name as she wakes up on the beach. I have some thoughts about this that I'll get into later. After RWBY leaves the beach, she finds herself in the jungle and gets caught in some kind of spatial loop that leaves her literally walking in circles until she gives up and sits down against a tree, crying, at which point it begins to rain. As she has her cry, a mouse attempts to pull a plant from out of the ground. RWBY, being the kind person she is, offers the mouse her hand and pulls the cheese from the ground. Ground cheese. Sure, why not? Regardless, this is where RWBY meets Little, and they offer to help her find her friends by leading her to their people, who may have seen them. Then we cut to Blake and Weiss, who have already found each other, despite the fact that RWBY and Blake were the ones to fall together, and Weiss herself didn't fall until a good few minutes later. Once again, I have some thoughts on this, but suffice to say, I don't think this was nearly as by chance as it may initially seem. Both girls are looking for Gamble Shroud, reasoning that it couldn't have fallen far after Weiss dropped it and had to be nearby. Blake alerts on something moving through the trees overhead, and as we'll see in a bit, she and Weiss are indeed being stalked by a truly terrifying foe. Blake asks Weiss what happened after they fell, and Weiss's mood noticeably shifts, her body tensing and her hands bunching into fists, before she lets out a breath and relaxes, saying that they should focus on finding the others first. And quickly thereafter, they find Gamble Shroud sticking out of a cluster of thorny vines. They try to pull and cut it free, but they fail, and Blake has to resort to leaning from a tree and attempting to grab her weapon. All the while, Weiss is cheering her on from the ground. Now, initially, it seems rather odd that Weiss is acting this cheerful, considering everything that happened back at the crossroads just a few minutes ago. But I think that's the very reason why Weiss is acting so upbeat here. She's compensating, basically. She knows she's the bearer of very bad news and is trying to keep spirits up, both hers and everyone else's. She knows she has to tell them about Penny, but until then, she's putting on a brave face and is focusing on one thing at a time. Unfortunately for the two of them, as soon as Blake's fingers brush Gamble Shroud, the pile of vines bursts to life and wraps them both up, and immediately we see the horrifying things that have been stalking the two huntresses. It's mice. A lot of mice. And they are adorable. The mice were easily my favorite part of this episode, and I pray we'll get to see more of them in the volume because I love them to death. Fortunately for the two girls, RWBY happens to show up at just the right time to see her two friends captured by an army of cheering mice and has a completely appropriate reaction to the scene before her. Fortunately for her, Little diffuses the situation and explains how they and RWBY met. So epic are her exploits that one of the mice flat out faints as they describe how she pulled the cheese out of the ground all by herself. Truly an epic for the ages. With 3 of the 4 girls of RWBY together, they set off to search for Yang, with Little serving as a guide. At least until they fall asleep. Interestingly, Little volunteers to guide them because they don't have anything to do yet. Earlier, when RWBY and Little first met, Little says that they don't have a name yet as they're still young, and associate RWBY's name with her purpose. Names clearly have a lot of meaning in the Ever After, and seem to be related to one's purpose in the Ever After. It'll be interesting to see how that develops as the volume progresses. Regardless, being a guide probably isn't going to be Little's purpose since they fall asleep on the walk. Fortunately, they did lead the girls to the right path before doing so. As they walk, RWBY asks Weiss if others fell as well, and what happened after RWBY and Blake fell. Just gonna say this now, I don't think we're going to be seeing the people who fell off the platform when Cinder had her gender reveal party right in the middle of the crowd. They seem to be very pointedly not bringing that up. Perhaps an in-lore reason for why we won't see them is that they were already dead when they fell. They all took the full force of a fire explosion without any aura to protect them after all. But I do hope we get at least some kind of explanation or justification for their absence, or better yet, they do show up. Regardless, Weiss dodges the real question and says she doesn't know if anyone else fell, and that they should find Yang before they go over everything. Which confirms for sure that none of Team RWBY are aware that Jean fell into the Ever After, and thus won't have a reason to go looking for him. Granted, we already knew this, but it'll be interesting to see how and when they do come across him. Before RWBY can continue the conversation, a loud roar interrupts them and the 3 rush to the end of the path, where they have their first encounter with what's going to be a recurring villain, the Jabberwock. If there was ever any doubt before, it is now confirmed for sure that this creature is the Jabberwocky, or the Jabberwock in this case. Which probably means that anyone who's going to put it down once and for all is going to need a Vorpal sword, or the equivalent thereof, but that's a discussion for later. Interestingly, as they approach the creature, it appears to be searching for something. In fact, it literally says seeking, searching, scouring, stalking, searching, scouring, stalking. So it definitely is searching for something or someone, but just what or who is not yet clear. However, as the Jabberwock is alerted by Little's squeak of alarm, it changes to detecting, listening, and as Blake and Weiss draw their weapons and advance on it, the Jabberwock suddenly springs into action and rushes towards them roaring, "Danger! Death!" It's worth noting that the Jabberwock didn't technically make the first aggressive move here. While it definitely initiated the fight, Weiss and Blake advanced on it with weapons drawn, even if they didn't charge in to attack it straight away. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they hadn't drawn their weapons and instead stayed still. Granted, I can't exactly blame them for their reaction. The Jabberwock is a very unsettling creature, and even Little, who might have an idea of what this thing is, was clearly frightened by it. That and Blake and Weiss are from a world where if something looks like a baby-eating monster, then it is a baby-eating monster, and they are trained to kill monsters. So their reaction to the Jabberwock makes sense. As it and Blake attack each other, the creature's words change again, either saying fight, rip, tear, or bite, rip, tear. I'm not exactly sure which it is. However, before things can get really started, Yang arrives, saying that she isn't done with it yet. That and the fact that she's breathing hard when we see her gives the pretty clear indication that Yang was in fact chasing it down, with only one arm. You can't say that Yang isn't brave, that's for damn sure. The fact that Yang was chasing it down seems to indicate that the Jabberwock had encountered her and, presumably after a fight, ran away. This is interesting, since it seemed entirely willing to take on Blake and Weiss. Granted, Yang is Team RWBY's powerhouse, and if any of them could face this thing one-on-one and hold her own, then it's her. But the Jabberwock seems somewhat opportunistic. It didn't hesitate to attack Blake, even with a second combatant to worry about. It may have intended to test them and see if it could defeat them and run if it couldn't, which in fact is exactly what it does as Yang, Weiss, and Blake surround it, saying recede, retreat, wait, return. That seems to indicate that the Jabberwock will be back and looking for vengeance. Or does it? When RWBY, Weiss, and Blake first saw it, the Jabberwock was looking for something. We don't know what or who that thing was, but it was clearly intent on its mission until it was alerted to their presence, and then went on the offensive as Blake and Weiss advanced on it. It seems to have run from Yang after getting into a fight with her, though we don't know which of them attacked the other first, and as soon as it's away from her, it starts looking for whatever it's trying to find. Even what it says as it retreats doesn't in and of itself indicate that the Jabberwock is going to try to find them again and take revenge. It talks about retreating, waiting, and then returning. I would bet it means returning to this exact spot to continue its search when it's safe to do so, rather than hunting Team RWBY, though I won't rule that out as a possibility either. With the Jabberwock gone, Yang tells RWBY that she wasn't supposed to be here. This makes a bit more sense as Yang later reveals that she thought she may have been dead and this was the afterlife. Thus she feared that her sister and teammates were dead as well. RWBY responds that if Yang thought she wasn't coming after her, then she must have forgotten who raised her. I think it's safe to say she means Yang here, though her words about coming after her are kind of odd. They seem to imply that after Cinder and Neo were dealt with, RWBY, and possibly the rest of the team, fully intended to go after Yang. Which is an interesting choice, I'll say, considering that they saw Yang apparently dissolve into glowing dust and, as far as they know, die upon falling off of the crossroads. I feel like most people would think that she was well and truly dead and wouldn't think to go in after her in an attempt to get her back. Regardless, we then have RWBY asking after her arm, Yang saying that she probably wouldn't believe her, and then Little pops out of RWBY's cloak to ask why they wouldn't. At which point, Yang probably reevaluates her earlier thought that they wouldn't believe her about a talking raccoon that yoinked her arm. We then have Blake going full cat for a bit and slamming into Yang for cuddles, and Weiss points out that she thought Yang would be happier to see them, to which Yang responds that while she is, if they're all here, then things must have gone pretty bad in the crossroads. At which point, all eyes fall on Weiss, and her composure cracks. She starts to cry as she tells them that no one came back from Vacuo to help, and that John tried to help, but Penny sacrificed herself. What else Weiss was going to say we don't know, as RWBY passes out upon hearing of Penny's death. Weiss's choice of words here are important. John tried to help, but Penny sacrificed herself. She doesn't say anything about John taking Penny's life, or that Penny asked him to do it. Now, Weiss's delivery of the information isn't the most direct, but that's understandable. She likely wouldn't be able to get into the full story and clearly explain things until she's had time to calm down and gather her thoughts. She may have done so while RWBY was out cold, we'll have to wait and see. But what Weiss says here seems to indicate one of two things. First, Weiss herself doesn't even know the full story of what happened to Penny. We see in the Volume 8 finale that before John ends Penny's life, Cinder hits Weiss across the head pretty hard, knocking her down. In fact, we can see as Cinder flies towards Jean that Weiss is out cold, meaning she almost certainly wasn't awake or aware for what Jean did. However, Jean could have still told her as he was trying to get her to the portal, and he clearly told her something since she knows that Penny specifically sacrificed herself. Or she saw her sister with blatantly obvious maiden powers, and she deduced that Penny took her own life to guarantee that Cinder couldn't get the powers of another maiden. Second, Weiss knows what Jean was forced to do, and refrained from telling the others. Again, the only way Weiss would know this is if Jean told her himself. In her condition, with everything going on, it isn't likely that Weiss would be able to piece together what happened on her own. If this is the case, then Weiss is quite simply protecting Jean. While she doesn't know he's in the Ever After too, telling them that he took Penny's life without him there to speak for himself could result in Blake, Yang, and RWBY being angry with him when they eventually get back to Remnant. Especially RWBY. RWBY is going to find out about what Jean had to do eventually, and when she does, she is not going to be happy with him at all. RWBY doesn't sacrifice people. Ever. Even if there's literally no other option, she will always do her best to save everyone. Which, as a side note, is why anyone who says RWBY should have been the one to help Penny just doesn't understand that RWBY would have never made that choice. She would have tried to fight Cinder or get Penny out. Cinder would have killed her, and then she would have killed Penny and had the power of two maidens, making the ending of Volume 8 go from fucked to turbo fucked, but I digress. Regardless, either way, the full story will come out eventually, and it's going to be a heavy blow when it does. Also, Weiss says something after she sacrificed herself that I can't make out. It kind of sounds like to give us time, but it's really hard to tell as it's very muffled. If someone does know what she was saying there, please leave it in the comments. I'm curious to know what it was. When RWBY comes to, it's raining again, just like when she started crying earlier in the episode. Yang is saying that they don't know what happened to the relic, or to everyone in Vacuo, or where Neo is. RWBY confirms that yes, Neo is definitely on the island with them. Yang asks if RWBY is okay, but her sister deflects by saying that Neo attacked her as they were falling. Which, spoiler alert, probably means RWBY isn't okay. Shocker, I know. Blake takes charge and says that they should focus on finding Crescent Rose in Yang's arm, then try to find a way back home. Weiss asks if they even can leave, and Yang puts forward her fears that they're dead. But Blake refutes this, saying that she believes they're in a fairy tale, and the episode concludes with the shot of the ever after we saw in the trailer before cutting to the new intro. Now, I'm going to be working on a separate video about the intro, so I won't talk about it here, but it's up for anyone who wants to watch it on YouTube if you want to see it for yourself and haven't yet. There's some pretty interesting stuff in it, and there have been all kinds of theories spawned from it. Now, that is where the episode ends, but not where this video ends. I have a theory I'd like to share with you all. So, our intrepid heroines found each other rather quickly, huh? Within the first episode, Team RWBY is once again back together. I guess the writers didn't want to spend a lot of time on getting the gang back together. Or is there more going on than we initially see? Think about it. RWBY lands on the beach of the Ever After completely alone, despite Neo falling right beside her. She wakes up hearing Penny call her name, then she gets stuck in a spatial loop walking through the same area over and over as she tries to push forward until she gives up and sits down, and meets Little, who then leads her to his people, who have already, met Weiss and Blake. Who, by the way, have already found each other despite the fact that Weiss fell last, out of Team RWBY at least. And RWBY and Blake fell together, but were separated when they arrived in the Ever After. In fact, they were even separated before they reached the Ever After, as Blake was nowhere to be seen in the void with RWBY. And then, after Little has diffused the situation, he leads them to a path that takes them up to the cliff face RWBY was trying to reach, where they just happen to encounter the jabberwock, and it just so happens that Yang was chasing down the jabberwock after it presumably retreated from its fight with her. And she arrives just in time to reinforce her friends and make the jabberwock retreat. Doesn't this seem like an awful lot of coincidences? Like, way too many for it to be natural. Everything just so happened to line up in such a way that the girls of RWBY all found each other within, I'd say, a couple hours. They all fell in the same part of the island. Maybe everyone who falls into the Ever After lands on the beach, but if that were the case, wouldn't Neo have landed close to RWBY? Wouldn't have Blake, for that matter? I think that the Ever After, or some power on it, wanted Team RWBY to find each other quickly, and in the order that they did. I think it organized things to ensure that they'd come across one another quickly and with the right entities in the right place to bring them together. RWBY was stuck in that one spot until she helped Little, who in turn helped her. Blake and Weiss were captured by Little's tribe because, cat, and Yang was chasing down the Jabberwock as the other three happened to stumble across it. I find it very unlikely that this was all sheer chance, and from a writing perspective, yes, the writers probably just didn't want to spend more than one episode with Team RWBY searching for one another, but from a story standpoint, I think something ensured that they would find each other quickly. This same thing ensured Neo wound up somewhere on the island away from RWBY and the others, and likewise made sure Jean landed somewhere else too. And I've got some thoughts on Jean and Neo in the Ever After, but I'll save those for the video on the intro. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Once again, please leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel for more RWBY content. What did you think of the episode? What theories do you have about the volume going forward? Share them in the comments below. My next video will either be a review video of episode 2 or a breakdown of the intro, but either way the next video likely won't be up until next week. I'll be away from home for a few days, so I won't have access to my recording or editing software, but I will try to work on my next script, so I'll at least have that ready to go when I'm home again. I hope you all have a wonderful day and never forget to keep moving forward.